Our story continues and we see the Qingchang sect's greatest warrior looking at the thousands of snakes in the pit. He believes the snakes have been collected for research by the Nine Demon School. The warrior wonders if this cave was originally the base of the Nine Demon School. Meanwhile, the Emi sect disciples are panicking. They are afraid of what will attack at any moment. Jianghu then displays her leadership by trying to calm the disciples down. Jianghu yells for them to stop panicking. She says the assassin won't make any rash movements since he's injured. The most important thing is to not scatter but gather. Wool knows he's racing against time due to his injuries, so he decides to make a move. But Jianghu senses something is wrong as he inches away. She turns quickly to defend. She is going head-to-head with Wool. Jianghu gets a hold of Wool's hand, so he tries to attack with his other hand. He aims at Jianghu's eye and sends 2 fingers through. She shrieks in pain, but that's all Wool was able to do. Wool was caught off guard by Young and now has her sword running through his side. Wool can tell Young has some great senses because of the perfect placement of her attack. Young is used to people complimenting her. Young then asks Wool to surrender, but Wool laughs and has something else in mind. He tries to attack Young, but she saw it coming. Wool gets up and pulls the sword out of his side. He looks back at Young and asks if she will spare him if he surrenders. Young hesitates and Wool says he knows she won't. He says she wouldn't have killed the rest of the Blood Shadow group if that were the case. Young then asks Wool how much he knows. He says he knows that Ran, the Abyss of 9 Calamities, is connected to everything. Not wanting any information to be leaked, Jianghu demands, Young kill Wool now. Young takes a second and says, although she is not fond of her master either, she has to avenge her fiancé, Wu Gun. Wool knows facing Young head-on is suicide. But before he tries to fall back, he's blasted with a ball of energy. Jianghu knows this is very bad for the Emi sect, so she tries to finish him herself. But the greatest warrior is not going to allow it and tells her to get out of the way. Jianghu tries to save the Emi sect one more time and says the assassin must be killed before he pulls any sorcery. The greatest warrior says he's not worried about that. He crouches down to talk to Wool and asks why he did it. He says even an assassin should have the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. Wool reveals to the greatest warrior that he was kidnapped and brought to the cave when he was 14. He didn't have the luxury of distinguishing between right and wrong. Wool says as someone who was raised to be an assassin, he didn't have a choice. The greatest warrior notices Wool isn't displaying any empathy. Wool's eyes are filled with such malice, and the greatest warrior feels he could have been a magnificent asset if he was raised right. The greatest warrior pulls out the tube. He's found the request to kill Wu Gun. The greatest warrior asks Wool who the requester is. Wool says he has an idea. He then asks the greatest warrior if he stopped them from killing him because he's also thinking of the same person. The greatest warrior looks back and Jianghu is sick to her stomach. The Qingchang sect disciples come running and ask if their master needs help. The greatest warrior asks Ming what happened to the others. Ming says they didn't make it because they fell into the assassin's trap. Upset, the warrior knows what he has to do next. He gets up and says to Wool, a quick death is too extravagant for him. He grabs Wool by the foot and begins dragging him. He wants Wool to die while feeling pain greater than hell. It's the least bit of atonement he can give to those he's killed. Atonement, Wool thinks to himself. He wants to know who will compensate him for the 7 years he has lost. The greatest warrior has dragged Wool all the way to the base of the cave with Wool's foot in his hand. He stares down at the pit of snakes. The greatest warrior gives Wool one last chance and asks if he still has no intention to atone. All Wool can do is laugh now. The greatest warrior knows what he must do. He tells Wool he has no right to live in this world, and then he throws Wool down into the pit of snakes. He wants Wool to die a painful death while atoning for his sins. The greatest warrior turns to the others and says they will now exit the cave. He wants the entrance sealed so that no one may ever use this place again. Wool was left to die alone in the snake pit. The snakes waste no time and begin biting Wool. But as the starved snakes take their turn, Wool is not fazed. Wool begins hissing back at the snakes and grabs a hold of one. Wool shows the snakes who's in charge and bites off one of the snakes' heads. Time passes, and Wool spends years in the cave alone. Wool was able to make it out of the snake pit and learn the martial art techniques of the Qingchang sect and the Emi sect from the books left on the dead bodies. Wool has spent so much time underground with the snakes that he adopted many of their characteristics. Wool is completely transformed with lighter skin and hair. His body went through many changes with his new snake-only diet. Wool now awaits his opportunity to avenge himself above ground. In Batang, we see a man being thrown out of the top floor of a brothel. He was thrown out by Wool, who has made it out of the cave. Wool is asking to be left alone for 3 days, and this is clearly upsetting the boss. She doesn't understand who this man is, or where he came from. One of her guards tries threatening Wool for throwing a martial artist from the Sapphire House in Batang out of the window. But Wool does not care, and attacks both of the guards with his soul-reaping thread. The woman is intimidated, as Wool has just subdued the guards with a flick of the wrist. She doesn't recall there being such a master in Sichuan. She now sees Wool as no ordinary man. The boss asks for Wool's forgiveness, and says he can stay as long as he wants. She will provide Wool with whatever he needs, and begs him to release her guards. Wool takes a second to think, but all the boss can think about is how serene his eyes are. To her, it feels like she's facing an enormous snake from the rainforest. Wool says he just needs 3 days. He releases the guards and says he would really appreciate it if no one disturbed him. The boss agrees to Wool's terms and asks for his name. He tells the boss his name is Wool. The 3 days pass and Wool is prepared to exit the brothel. When he left the cave, he didn't have any clothes, so the boss at the brothel was kind enough to lend him some. They not only provided him with a set of clothes, but they also gave him a box of lunch for when he gets hungry. As Wool leaves, the boss is still in disbelief as to who she just met. On Wool's journey, he takes a break to enjoy his meal and hide out from the rain. He's admiring nature, as it's one thing he's missed for most of his life. Wool reflects on how 7 whole years have passed. His past is not something he will ever forget, but he realizes if he doesn't break free from the past, he probably won't be able to move forward. And in order to break free from his past, the Qingchang sect and the Emi sect have to pay for ruining his life. Wool thinks he'll be able to obtain more information about the sects if he heads to Chengdu. As Wool is on his break, we see a group of people approaching. They are also trying to find refuge from the rain. Once they get under the roof, they begin bickering about being wet. And after blaming each other, they spot Wool sitting there watching them. They are surprised to see someone else up in the mountains. The woman immediately compliments Wool on how handsome he is. Then the man she's with says she should be thanking him for getting them lost. But this annoys her, so she tells him to shut up. She turns back to Wool and says it must be fate that they all ended up staying under the same roof together. She introduces herself as Ranju, and Wool introduces himself as well. Ranju is enamored and annoys her counterpart, as she always goes crazy whenever she meets a handsome man. The man introduces himself as Dayoshi, and the monk introduces himself as Hugh. Ranju asks Wool where he's headed, and he says he's going to Chengdu. Coincidentally, Ranju and the others are also headed to Chengdu. She thinks it would be a great idea if they traveled together, but Wool is unsure. They are a peculiar combination of people at first sight, but they are all masters that can team up at any time. He wonders if Ranju is their central figure, because it doesn't really seem like she's the leader. Wool is willing to take the chance and accepts. He believes there must be some other powerful order that keeps them together, and he wants to know more. They begin their trip together, and find a crew to board with. Dayoshi says they will leave in 1 hour. Ranju has to complain about something and says rice cargo ships are uncomfortable. She loves to make Dayoshi's blood boil. Ranju then turns to Wool and asks why he's headed to Chengdu. Wool says he's meeting with an acquaintance. Ranju wants to know more and Wool says he's meeting with people who owe him a debt. She asks if Wool is in debt and he says no, he is owed a debt. Wool then asks why she's headed to Chengdu. Ranju says she's going to Chengdu to do business. Wool says he doesn't see any merchandise with her. Ranju laughs and says, "You can sell what you can't see." Dayoshi then interrupts and asks Wool what clan he is from. Wool says he isn't part of a clan. They are surprised to hear that, and Wool asks if that's a problem. Dayoshi says no, but is then left wondering who Wool is. As they're on the water, everything seems normal and peaceful. People are conversing and enjoying the company of others. Wool takes it all in after being isolated for so long. But his peace is disrupted when Ranju wants his attention. She wants to know what he was staring at. She says he had such a sentimental look on his face. Wool tells her to go away if she's going to keep talking nonsense. Ranju laughs it off and tells Wool he's playing with her heart like a fiddle. Dayoshi and Hugh watch, and Hugh asks if they should intervene. Dayoshi says the almighty blood spider is not going to be bewitched by a man. All her actions are calculated. She sure is playing cuter for a woman with the temperament as malicious as a spider. Aside from that, Dayoshi says Wool is quite suspicious. Then the current gets stronger and disrupts their voyage. They look out and see an oncoming boat. It's a boat filled with pirates looking to steal their rice. One of the sailors yells for everyone to arm themselves. They are in quite the predicament. But then Dayoshi asks the sailor if he needs help. The sailor asks Dayoshi who he is, and Dayoshi says it doesn't matter who he is, it only matters what he can do. Then the monk Hugh jumps off the boat and lands on the pirates' boat. The pirates are a little thrown off at first, but they rush to attack Hugh. Hugh takes them on all by himself, leaving the sailors and his mates shocked. This is nothing Dayoshi hasn't seen before. He tells the sailor that he owes him 500 yangs. Hugh finishes off all the pirates and hops back onto the cargo ship. Dayoshi thanks him for his work, and Hugh says to have Ranju do it next time. Dayoshi laughs it off and says he'd be relieved if she didn't go crazy on him just for asking. They look around to see where she is, and she is still trying to get Wool's attention. Ranju asks Wool to stay with them in Chengdu, but Wool says he's more comfortable alone. As Dayoshi and Hugh receive their pay, they can't believe Ranju was still trying. But then Dayoshi concludes, there's no way Wool is average. A normal person would be scared in this situation. He believes only someone who has gone through pandemonium can have such eyes. Ranju tries one last time and gives Wool her puppy eyes. Wool doesn't know what she's doing, and Ranju says she can't believe he's turning her down. Wool says he's not into poisonous roses, no matter how beautiful they are. Her tears quickly stop because she's glad Wool called her beautiful. That's enough for me, she says. Wool thinks these people are vagabonds who sell their strength for money. Just now, they showed just enough strength for rumors of their skills to be spread throughout Chengdu. He wonders if that means a conflict large enough to require vagabonds has occurred in Chengdu. He doesn't believe that the Emi sect and the Qingchang sect would allow any sort of conflict to occur in Chengdu. But then he thinks, what if their circumstances aren't very good? He remembers his last moments with the Qingchang sect and the Emi sect. Wool wants to force them to atone the way he was forced to. They finally dock the boat and are ready to head to Chengdu. Dayoshi says they have to reach Chengdu by morning and asks Wool what his plan is. Wool says he will just stay here for the night. Ranju is upset and asks Wool if he's sure he can't go with them. Wool says he has something he has to prepare by himself. He provides her with a bit of hope and says he'll contact them when he reaches Chengdu. Ranju makes Wool promise, and he does. They can finally head off and leave Wool. Wool makes his way into the town and enters a lodge. Immediately upon entering, Wool receives some looks. He's greeted and asked if he's there for a meal or lodging. Wool says he's there for both and wants his meal first. Wool's meal is brought to him while a group of men question his clothing from afar. As Wool tries to enjoy his meal, he is interrupted by a man. This man introduces himself as Yang, the chief escort of the Nine Treasures Escort Corps. Jiang then asks Wool why he's wearing women's clothing if he's a man. Jiang says he made a bet with his comrades that he would find out. Wool says it's a shame that you just lost your money. Jiang doesn't back down and says he can't tell if Wool is telling the truth. Jiang's comrades dared him to strip Wool so everyone can know for sure. As Jiang falls for the peer pressure, Wool flicks his chopstick right into Jiang's eye. Jiang's comrades get nervous as Jiang is in tears. Jiang can't believe he just got stabbed in the eye because of a joke. But this was a result of peer pressure. Wool decides since Jiang can't see what's in front of him anyway, he'll just take his other eye as well. Jiang's comrades finally try to back him up, but Wool loads up with more chopsticks. Wool fires off the chopsticks and takes out the bullies. He says they needed to take responsibility for their actions. Later on, in the city of Chengdu, we see Ranju and the others. They notice that half the people roaming the streets are carrying a weapon. Ranju says this is the perfect opportunity for them. Hugh says one's misfortune is fortune for them. What could be more tragic than this, he asks. This annoys Ranju, and she says she doesn't want to hear that kind of talk from him. Why not, Hugh asks. Ranju replies and asks, who do you think among us is the most money-crazed? Dayoshi, he quickly responds. Dayoshi tells them to stop with their nonsense. They reach their destination, and Ranju is happy to see her captain Muriang. Muriang calls Ranju his vice captain and says she's right on time. Hugh and Dayoshi also greet the captain, as they haven't seen him in quite some time. Muriang greets them back. The four of them sit at a table, and Dayoshi says he was just in need of money after taking too long of a break. Muriang asks, "Isn't that why we've all come together?" Dayoshi says he must ask, "Are we really going to meddle in this matter?" Muriang asks, "Why is it burdensome? Then get out," he says. Dayoshi nervously laughs and says, "Don't say that." "Who said anything about that?" he asks. Renju then asks if it's because of the Qingchang sect and the Emi sect. Dayoshi then asks, "Doesn't everyone know they've been in conflict with each other for 7 years?" "That's right," Muriang answers. Muriang says no one knows the reason, but they've had many disputes for the past several years, ranging from clashes between martial artists to an all-out battle. The conflict between the two greatest sects of Sichuan naturally led to a split in all of Jianghu and Sichuan. Muriang believes they will have a massive clash soon. Then Ranju intervenes and says she wonders why they are fighting. Vice Captain Muriang says that reason isn't important. What's important is that an opportunity for him to fulfill his dream has come true. Later on, we see Wool leaving the lodge. The owner of the lodge remembers Wool's actions and gets afraid. He hopes Wool will leave peacefully. Wool approaches the owner and asks who here knows best about the internal affairs of Sichuan. The owner asks for clarification on what Wool means by internal affairs. Wool says he wants to know the situation between the sects. The owner says Wool should visit the workshop for that information. More specifically, the Fire Dragon Room. It is a sect created through the gathering of Sichuan's artisans long ago. Since they've been doing business with all the sects of Sichuan for a long time, they'll gladly answer your questions if you buy a weapon from them first. Wool makes his way to the workshop. He sees a man yelling and asking his worker what he thinks he's doing. "Who said you could use a hammer?" the man asks. He yells, "I told you not to ever use a hammer in the workshop," and he kicks his worker in the back of the head. "Just do the chores you've been assigned," he says. His worker turns to him, but then the man asks the worker what he's looking at. He demands his worker to go to the back and do chores until he calls him back. He's forbidden from entering for the time being. Then the man realizes Wool saw that whole interaction. He asks Wool what he has come to purchase, but Wool wants to know what that worker did wrong. The man says that's so true. He heard he is a descendant of the Tang clan, but he keeps trying to use the hammer without permission. "Are descendants of the Tang clan not allowed to use hammers?" Wool asks. The man then asks Wool if this is his first time in Sichuan. Wool responds and says you could say that. The man begins to say the Tang clan fell to ruin. It was because they had stood on the demon cult side long ago. Because of that, they were forced to close their doors by someone titled the strongest in history. And the clan rapidly shriveled up and was ruined in the eyes of the Sichuan sects. The Tang clan is a renegade that betrayed the Sichuan Jianghu. That's why no workshop ever passes down their secret techniques to anyone related to the Tang clan. They're afraid that the same history would be repeated. So the descendant pays for the sins of the ancestor, he says. "Who told them to stand on the demon cult's side?" the man asks. "It's the price the Tang clan chose of their own accord," he says. The man then asks Wool again what he came to purchase. Wool says he came to purchase a flying sword. "Follow me," the man says. All weapons made in the workshop are displayed in the back. As they walk to the back, Wool asks if the man has had a lot of orders coming in lately. The man starts laughing and says, after the Emi sect and the Qingchang sect started fighting full scale, the orders increased twofold. He says the atmosphere in Sichuan became chaotic, but business is booming for us. Even now, all our workshop artisans have their hands full with making weapons ordered by various sects. As the man's talking, Wool notices the Tang clan descendant getting beaten. The men beating him are saying the Tang clan was ruined because they broke rules like this. They are trying to teach him his place. As Sochu is being beaten, he notices a dagger lying on the ground close to him. Wool approaches them and says humans truly are more atrocious than beasts. The moment they allow themselves to be devalued, they are pulled and ripped apart until their death. If you make enduring a habit, you'll have to keep living as a lowly dog. Wool walks up to Sochu and asks him how he will live. The men beating Sochu ask Wool who he is. They tell Wool to stop talking nonsense and go somewhere else. This has to do with the Fire Dragon Room, they say. Wool ignores them and asks Sochu again how he will live. The men get annoyed with Wool and ask if he's ignoring them. And as the man is looking at Wool, Sochu jumps up and bites him in the neck. Sochu takes the man down, and the man tries to ask Sochu what he's doing. Sochu then grabs the dagger and puts it to the man's eye. The others from the group are in shock and ask why he's acting like a beast. Sochu gets up and asks, "When did you guys ever treat me like a human? You always treated me like a beast," he says. "You seriously think you can get away with this?" they ask. "Do as you like," Sochu says. "I'm tired of getting beaten up by you guys for no reason. But keep this in mind," he warns. "I'll slit the throat of the next person who messes with me." As the men walk away, Sochu starts to fall from his exhaustion. But Wool is there to catch him. Thank you for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed the recap, but the story is not over yet. There is more to come in the next chapter, so stay tuned and subscribe to my channel to find out what happens next. See you soon.